Hello and welcome to Qtr Time podcast in partnership with Lovell Netball. I'm Lucy G.
And I'm Lucy P. And we're here to bring you all the netball goodness you never knew you needed.
At Qtr Time Pod, we are big advocates of being open when talking about periods. And so we're really pleased to say that our friends at Modibody have collaborated with Puma to launch a new range of active period underwear to keep you free from leaks, sweat and discharge when you work out, no matter the time of the month.
This active period underwear collection comes in 3 styles and a range of sizes, absorbencies and 2 colorways. If you're passionate about the planet, then you'll be pleased to know they are made from 82% recycled material.
As sponsors of the podcast, Modibody are delighted to offer our listeners an exclusive 15% discount on the collection at modibody.com if you use the code QTR Modibody. You can find all the T's and C's and the code in the podcast notes.
Go check it out. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Qtr Time podcast. It's episode 14, Luce.
Oh, I know. Crazy.
I know. Season 3 is a teenager. Isn't that crazy?
It's a teenager.
Yeah.
Oh, I know. It's wild. And like, we've only got a few rounds left now of the season.
Yeah. It's absolutely flown by, hasn't it? So, Luce, bring us up to speed. What's coming up on today's show?
So first up, we're going to be bringing you up to date with some big news from this week within the Super League before running through our 3-word summaries of round 16 and revealing our game of the round and play of the round. Our special topic this week is netball stats, and we are bringing you a super special podcast crossover with the awesome Erin Delahunty and Aaron Fox from Real v Feel podcast. I'm really excited for this one. We're going to take a deep dive into data, including the role of a statistician, telling a story with data, useful metrics in recruiting and coaching, how stats are recorded and analysed, and so much more. It's really exciting, actually.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that word. I can't say the word for a person who does stats.
Statistician.
I've tried it. I can't say it. So if that comes up at any point in the conversation, I'm going to get you to cover on that. And the big news, of course, this week is that Praskovia Qtr has been ruled out of the season on medical grounds. So yeah, very, very surprising news there from Surrey Storm. We're, of course, sending her all the very best. And Storm have signed Sienna Rushton to replace her. So if you missed this news, just bringing you up to date with that. Really, really good, actually, to have her back in the Super League. I think she took a gap year and went travelling around different places. So yeah, great to have her back. Wanted to raise a discussion point. Do we think that this impacts Storm's chances of making it to the grand final?
Yes. Undoubtedly, I think. Qtr is an absolute gun. She's so strong. And I do think, I was actually at the Bath game this week and both Frankie Wells and Sienna Rushton, they did really, really well, but Peace is like another level.
She's another level, yeah.
So I do think that they'll struggle. I don't think they'll make grand final. But to be honest, I didn't think they'd make grand final before Peace was out.
I thought you would say that. And I think I probably agree with that they have plateaued and they haven't really excelled against the other top 4 sides. So you'd have to think that, with what it's looking like at the moment, it's looking like they would play Pulse most likely. And so, or even Lightning, I think you'd think they probably would struggle.
Yeah, I agree.
And the last piece of news this week is Emma Dovey, back in the Super League, of course, has reached 200 Netball Super League appearances. What a great milestone.
200, that is amazing.
Yeah.
Such a good milestone.
For sure. So moving on to our results from the Netball Super League round 16. And the first game was Mavericks versus Sirens, and it was 41-38 in favour of Mavericks. And my 3-word summary was a decent scrap. Although this was a really low-scoring game, it sounds like it was a proper battle. Sirens started strong, going out by 5, but then a devastating 12-5 quarter from Mavs put them out in front for the win. Stats-wise, there are a couple of key figures. Missed shots, Mavs had just 2 and Sirens 12. But an interesting one for me, Mavs had 55 feeds with 41 goals, whereas Sirens had 74 feeds and only 38 goals. So it just shows how Mavs, more often than not, not, they had that direct ball into a favourable shooting position, whereas Sirens were frequently having to work the ball closer to the post. But a shout out as well to Monique Mayer, who had a corker by the sounds of it, 5 rebounds, 4 intercepts and 2 deflections.
Wow, yeah, great game from her.
Mm-hmm.
So moving on then, Storm versus Bath was next up, with Storm taking a really convincing win, 66-45. And I've gone for finding plan B. Storm won the first 3 quarters of this game, winning the first one by 11 goals. And they were also able to test out a new shooting combination too, with Sienna Rushton joining the side following the news about Peace and Qtr, as we've mentioned already. Really great to have Sienna back in the NSL after a gap year. She really has so much growth during her time with Rhinos, particularly under Dan Ryan. So great to have her back. Team Bath are still without Imogen Allison, and you could really tell that they were struggling without her in terms of that mid-court connection and transition. But really, it was their attack that let them down. Again, we had 3 different combinations in this game, and none of them could really break down the defensive combo of Knights and Gusketh.
Yeah, I mean, who can really?
Right?
Very few teams in the league. Next up, it was, this was a good one. Lightning versus Stars, 57 Lightning, 51 Stars. And I said, hairy at times. I thought this was a really interesting game. Cholok was a late out for this one, so Thacker had a pretty big day at the office. And although Lightning secured their semi-final spot with this win, Stars really, really made them work for it, particularly in that final quarter. Stars went down heavily in the first quarter and spent the rest of the game in chase mode. I think it was 10-1 at one point, which is yikes. But actually, Lightning were in some ways pretty lucky to have got away with the win. It could very easily have been an upset, and I think they need to have a look at themselves at how they let Stars come back in so much. It was only 2 in it in the last few minutes. We also have to talk about penalties for this game. Stars ended up on 40 more penalties than Lightning, even more than Pulse versus Thunder, which people were up in arms about. And Jazz Brown and Joe Tripp had 42 penalties between them. And Jazz Brown only played half a game, so a lot of those were Joe Tripp. And that was 7 more than the entire Lightning team. Wow. So that for me is a major issue and really, really needs to be addressed. That is just way too many penalties.
Yeah, way too many. I think Joe and Jazz both ended on a warning as well, didn't they?
Yeah, they were on warnings.
Yeah, definitely needs a look at that. And so final game of the round then was Thunder versus Rhinos, with Thunder taking a very narrow win at 65-63. And I've gone for an unexpected delight. This game, maybe I'm doing a disservice to Rhinos, but this game really caught me off guard. I was fully expecting, 10, 15 goal win to Thunder, but Rhinos just said, not today. There was so much to like about this game. We saw incredible patches of play from both teams, but it was Thunder's composure and experience that just gave him the edge at the end. Denise Potgieter was outstanding for Thunder, shooting 49 from 51 at 96%. But most impressive for me was her aerial strength and her ball control. The matchup between her and Oyesola gave me life and was so entertaining to watch. This was definitely the most clinical that we've seen from Rhinos, with only 4 unforced errors. And I think their growth this season has been incredible.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, just looking back, Lou, so in round 6 this year, it was 67-52. So it was a 15 goal
there you go.
Gap. So, I don't think you're kind of too far off thinking that it might be similar 10-15. And so, yeah, it was really good that it was so close.
Yeah, it's just nice to see Rhinos sort of finally coming together. I was getting a bit worried at one point that we weren't seeing the progress, but now they're really starting to get there. And so perfect transition then. Our game of the round is Thunder versus Rhinos. And I think before we get stuck into the details of the game itself, we have to acknowledge what a brilliant job Thunder did with the production of this game at the AO Arena. For me, they just showed everyone what every single game of Netball Super League should be like. Yeah. This is absolutely the direction that the league is going in, and props to Thunder for leading the charge in that respect.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, the game itself, as I said, fully expecting this to be a blowout, but it really wasn't. This was hands down the best we've seen Rhinos play all season. And I think it's actually Rhinos at this stage now is what I expected to see from them at the start of the season, and for them to then really grow. And I think had we not had all the disruption with their squad, then potentially we would have done. But it's taken them slightly longer than I anticipated to get to this point.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think actually it's worth noting that Liana Leota is there for 3 years, and she'll obviously be trying to remain, you know, to get this group to remain for that time as well. So I think you can see them building for the future. But yeah, it has taken a while. I would say that it wasn't a perfect performance from Rhinos. There were times when they could have pushed ahead and extended the lead, but they just had a few silly errors, particularly the start of that second quarter. They just kind of fell apart. And you do see this sometimes with teams where they just have patches where it just really, like, seriously all goes wrong. But they did, to be fair, regain their composure, pull their socks up a bit, which actually at the start of the season they wouldn't do. They would just let the game run away.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think as well, they had such beautiful depth and width in this game. They really pulled the Thunder defenders wide, which made it so much harder to get hand to ball. It just truly patches of sensational play. And I think Ellie Bird, definitely the strongest game we've seen from her all season. Vicky Oyosola, I mean, I literally cannot say enough about Vicky this season. She was really close to being our player of the round again for the second time this season. She had a rebound, 3 intercepts, and 10 deflections in this game.
Wow.
And for me, like, there are a few athletes in the league this year who are on the same level as her this season. Her elevation is crazy, speed is outrageous, and multiple times she has kept Rhinos in the game almost single-handedly. And I think if she doesn't get into the Roses program this season, then I will literally be there scratching my head, because she could not do any more to earn her spot in there. So it'd be interesting to see when that does come out. And I think looking at Thunder, the sooner they can get Ormond and Shadeen van der Merwe back, the better. Bird definitely had the better of Huckle for about 90% of this game, and they just lacked that depth in the defensive end in this game. However, Amy Carter, boy, did she step up. She had 5 intercepts and 2 deflections, both of which resulted in a gain. And I think at times it was sort of errant passes from Rhinos that kind of gifted it to her. But you do still have to be in the right place at the right time to be able to mop those up, you know? And I think as well, Nat Metcalf, she was another one who stood up. She was relentless in her attacking efforts. She had a whopping 48 feeds in this game and just 1 unforced error, which, considering how much she's handling the ball, is really impressive. And I do think that she was sort of forced to compensate for a much quieter Lois Pearson in this game, which isn't sustainable, but she is a gun, so...
And we said that last week as well about Lois Pearson not having such a strong game. So, yeah, interesting. But fun fact, prior to this game, Nat Metcalf had already surpassed the total number of feeds she had from last season by 19, with 5 games to go. So you're right, she's having a stonking season.
Yeah, for sure. Now, before we move on to our play of the round, I just wanted to highlight something for the listeners with the viewing figures for this game. When I tuned in at the start of the game, literally just before broadcast started, there was only 798 people watching. And when I then left and rejoined it at half time to see how the figures had gone up, and it had gone up to 1,600. Now, those numbers are pretty terrible, I think it's fair to say. Like, we need more eyes on our game.
Yeah, I mean, undoubtedly. I mean, you look at some of the figures from the women's football, from the women's cricket, women's rugby, you know, all of those kind of viewing figures are really shooting up, and we're still not quite there with netball. I think probably a lot of people being at the arena probably took that number down quite significantly. You know, had over 4,000 in the arena, so a lot of those people would have probably otherwise been watching at home. But yeah, we've just got to get those numbers up. So spread the word, guys. Get on your netball group chat. I often do a post if there's going to be a particularly good game happening at the weekend. I'll post in there to remind people of what's happening, because people do like that, to just get a little kind of, oh yeah, that's on. You know, that they may not be watching and following the Super League religiously like most of our listeners probably are, but you know, those fans are what we need to be bringing in into the sport as well.
Yeah, definitely.
So moving on to our player of the round, It is this week, Nat Panagari. She was outstanding, although an honourable mention has to go to Amy Carter, Vicky Oysola, Lenise Potgieter, Jazz Brown, Nat Metcalf, and Emma Thacker as well, who worked her socks off in the Stars game. So yeah, it's quite a long list of contenders this week. But I have to say, I mean, Nat is just in the form of her life at the moment. She was remarkable in this game. She had the most feeds on court for Lightning with 26, and she also clocked up an intercept and 2 deflections. But what's really impressive is that she only had 3 penalties. Wow. 3 penalties. It's just really good considering she was getting stuck in. And given how contested the game was and being up against Gabby Marshall, who's another potential England prospect, that is really impressive. Yeah. She kept Gabby very quiet in this game with only 8 feeds. And in contrast, the last time that Stars played a top 4 team, Gabby had 15 feeds. That was against Pulse. So I think Nat really got the better of her in this round and was keeping her out of that prime feeding position. Nat's a bit similar to Jade Clark in the sense of being that really calming presence, someone who keeps their cool when things get a bit hairy, as per the 3-word summary. But she also has this Duracell bunny mode on court where she just constantly gives and gives and gives. She never stops working. If you're a young player or any player and you want to see offer and reoffer again and keep reoffering, watch Nat Panagari. She's outstanding at that. And she actually got the turnover that saved Stars from coming back level in that last quarter as well. And she's just one of those players that pretty much always stands up. If she has a bad day, Lightning has a bad day, and she's just critical. Yeah, a real barometer for the team, isn't she? I mean, surely she has to be in and amongst the discussion for Roses. You would have to think. I mean, we've been saying, where's our 60-minute centre? I mean, could it be Nat Panagari? I think the height at international is a factor, because if you get a sort of taller centre from another country, sometimes that can be a bit of a disadvantage. But she is like so Heffernan. Quick. Yeah, exactly, like a Heffernan. She is so rapid and that has the vision, is that real true centre, defensively really strong, but also will give the ball. She's not really one way or the other, if that makes sense. Like Imogen Allison, much more of a defensive centre. Elle McDonald, much more of an attacking centre. Panagari is right there in the middle, but she hasn't played as much with the combinations. So, she wasn't at the quad series, she wasn't at recent series. So it would be probably maybe a bit of an outside chance, I'd say. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised at all to see her named as the mid-court reserve, for sure. Yeah. In fact, I might even be a little bit surprised if she's not, given the form that she's in, but... Agreed. Yeah, interesting. Coming up after the break, we hear from Erin Delahunty and Aaron Fox from the Real V Feel podcast for Netball Stats. I don't know about you, Luce, but it gets to this point in the season and all I'm thinking about is getting new trainers. When you're just eyeing them up all the way through, I'm feeling it. Yeah, I love a bit of new stash, but I'm the type of person, I'll put all of these things into my basket, spend hours and hours looking around, but then I'll never actually go through with it. It just sits in my basket forevermore. It's so true. I know, honestly, can relate. But luckily, Lovell Netball are offering a 15% discount on all first-time orders with code NETPOD15 at lovellnetball.co.uk. So you're sorted. Yeah, and honestly, Lovell Netball is the place to go. Whatever you want, they've got absolutely everything. Everything. Such a good range. Yeah. So whether you're looking for trainers, you're looking for bibs, you're looking for supports, whatever you need. Sports bras, all of that stuff. Sports bras, exactly. They have got you covered. So don't forget, that's a 15% discount off all first-time orders with the code NETPOD15 at lovellnetball.co.uk. Love a bit of Lovell. Oh my God. Love a bit of Lovell. Love a bit of Lovell. Happy shopping, guys. We are delighted to welcome freelance journalist Erin Delahunty and lecturer in applied sports science at Deakin University, Aaron Fox, otherwise known as the co-host of Real V Feel podcast. How are you guys doing?
Good, thank you. Thank you for having us.
Absolute pleasure. Really excited to do this pod crossover. So thank you so much for coming on. Firstly, before we get stuck in, we just want to tell you how much we love the Real V Real v Feel podcast. It's a bit of a mouthful for 7 a.m. in the morning. But honestly, every week you guys really deliver the goods, and we love a good stat, don't we, Lou? So it's really a treat to get the full rundown on the key numbers in the SSM. The historical data you have access to is incredible. So for anyone listening, we'll link to Real v Feel in the show notes so you guys can check it out as well if you haven't already. But before we get stuck into some juicy stats, can you both just give us a rundown on how you got involved in netball and also how you know each other? So, Erin, coming to you first.
I've been sorry, Aaron or Erin? That was a good start.
Erin, sorry. This is going to be a recurring theme. I can see it.
I'll let you go, Erin. You start.
Feel free to call me Della if you like, if that makes it any easier. Well, I guess I've been a newspaper and print journalist for, nearly 25 years now, working across news and features and sport. Also worked a little bit in communications and PR for my sins. And back in 2015, I was loudly complaining to anyone that would listen that there wouldn't be any real serious, in-depth analysis of the Netball World Cup, which of course was happening in Sydney. And an old colleague of mine mentioned this to his editor at Guardian Australia, which hadn't been operating for very long here down under at that time. And then that editor called me and said, I will take copy from you if you're going to be in Sydney. So I pretty much quit my soul-crushing comms job that I was in at that time and just thought, do you know what? I'm just going to go to Sydney and I'm going to write about netball. I'm going to see what happens. So I guess I've built my career from there, and I've now covered Super Netball, World Cups and Commonwealth Games ever since. And I try really hard not to say that I'm lucky, because I've worked my butt off every day since then and probably before to sort of make the majority of my living off of talking about and writing about netball. But I do feel lucky that I am able to do that. And I guess with the podcast, Aaron and I were employed by Melbourne Vixens last year to run a pod for them, which was specifically about the stats related to the Melbourne Vixens, who of course compete in Super Netball. We had never met before then. I'm not sure if we even followed each other on Twitter. Aaron's shaking his head at me. No, we didn't even know each other.
I followed you on Twitter, of course.
Followed you. I don't know if I followed you though, Aaron.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, that's fair enough.
Savage.
I actually think we might have met for the first time right towards the end of our last Super Netball season, when we went to a pretty disappointing preliminary final from the Vixens' point of view. And then, this year we've obviously expanded it out into the entire league.
Wow. Oh, that's so interesting. So, Aaron, then, how did you get involved in netball?
So I sort of stumbled into it a little bit through some various research projects that I did early on in my academic study and research career. So the first sort of real research project I did as part of my undergraduate studies was looking at a video-based analysis of the movement and skill demands of international netball. And before then, I wasn't that involved with netball, looking at it through my studies, and that it wasn't a sport that I saw myself necessarily working in post-study. But that first research project was really interesting, and it made me realize that netball is a sport that's really lacking in research in the sports science field, and particularly for the two main areas that I work in. One is this kind of performance analysis, statistics side of things, and there's a lack of research in the sport, and the structure of the game with the specific rules and areas of play that the players are allowed to go in really makes it interesting to look at from a performance analysis perspective, different to a lot of other sports. And the other main area that I research in is in lower limb biomechanics and how that relates to sporting injuries. So looking at the way people move and how that impacts injury risk. And if you follow netball, you know that it is a bit of a disaster sport for knee and ankle injuries at times. The way it's designed, how it's played is just not that great for that lower limb. And so it's a really interesting cohort to try and understand how you change the mechanics of how someone moves to reduce the risk of injury in a sport like that. And even in that space as well, there's a real lack of research in the area. So like I said, it wasn't a sport that I necessarily saw myself going into from a research career, but it's just become one of those really interesting things to keep following different paths and going down the rabbit hole to try and understand the sport better.
Yeah. And I mean, well, thank goodness you are in the sport, because as we know, there's a critical lack of research or lack of resources and anything in netball, really, even though I don't think it should be, because it is such a fantastic sport, but that is just the reality. And thank goodness for you as well, Della, for being a freelance journalist in the sport, because honestly, some of the things that you write are just outstanding, and really cast a critical eye over the sport, which I think is absolutely necessary.
Thanks,
yeah,
Lucy.
thank goodness
checks in the mail. Thank you for that. I really appreciate that. I do like, I'm often referred to as a netball journalist, and I often say to people, I really am looking forward to the day when I'm just a sports journalist.
Yeah.
And a lot of my writing, I deliberately treat netball like we would any other sport, and demand really highly of both our athletes, our officials, and our administrators as well. It doesn't always make me popular, but that's sort of always been my intention.
Yeah, it's completely necessary and absolutely fantastic. So we're going to sort of strip it back a little bit and take it really back to basics for any of the listeners who, for them, this might be a little bit of a new topic. So, Aaron, for anyone who doesn't know, what is the role of a statistician in netball? Lucy's favourite word that she cannot say.
That's why you're asking this question.
Yeah, 100%.
Exactly.
So I guess the role of any statistician in sport is to work with numbers and data. Like, as performance analytics and statistics in sport has grown in modern times, the need for people with skills in this area of understanding numbers, collating data, managing databases is really important lately, and it's a real focus of sports studies at university as well. So there's been a huge explosion of data in sport, from collecting statistics from the game, using technology to do that. So statisticians are really going to be the ones who are managing the collection and analysis of that data. And I guess you need to expand this out to the role of sports scientists and performance analysts, because they're kind of the terms you will more regularly see related to sporting teams. And like I'm mentioning, in these modern times with data in sport, sports scientists and performance analysts almost need to have those statistician type skills. For example, to work with a netball team, I don't think you could go in there as a sports scientist or performance analyst and not be comfortable working with numbers and data and databases. It's just how it is in that particularly elite sporting environment at the moment.
I mean, I think it's really interesting, because there's what I've learned through your podcast and through a lot of social media discourse recently is the different levels that we got. Like, I thought I knew a game of netball, right? And I thought I was fairly good at analysing it and looking at sort of all different metrics. And we have really basic stuff over here, like number of intercepts, number of goals, goal percentage. The champion data that you guys use over there obviously has like a next tier around, centre pass to goal percentage, gains to goal percentage, all that kind of stuff, and much more in depth than what we've got. But then what I've also learned recently is that actually underneath that, it just goes so much deeper. And before we come to you, Della, about sort of managing the data versus the feel of it, Aaron, we know that netball is incredibly fast-moving game. There's like zero dead time normally. There's at least 100 goals scored, over 100% of passes taken in a game. The ball's passed at least every 3 seconds. It is a rapid sport. So can you talk us through the actual process of how data is collected in real time and the role of the caller and the receiver who are courtside? Like, how does it all work?
I'll preface this by saying I'm not 100% certain on the exact processes that's employed by someone like Champion Data at the Super Netball level, particularly with respect to the number of callers and receivers they have for looking at and managing the game. And if you're interested in, I guess, an example of seeing how this works, Champion Data actually has some good videos on their YouTube channel, I think, of how it's done in an Australian rules football context, where they have quite a lot of people calling out what's happening in the game and relaying that information onto the people who are coding it. But that's effectively how it works. You do need multiple people to do this really effectively. Generally, someone who's watching the game and calling out specific things to a person who has a it's set up with buttons in specific ways that they can click certain things, and it codes certain events into their database. And these coding platforms they should be quite well designed in that they automate a lot of the processes. So we've used one in our research studies where in netball, when a goal is scored, it'll automatically shift the next event to a center pass, right? Because that's what happens every time. You don't need to click another button. And so little things like that are probably embedded into their systems that help really manage the process and automate it. You will have seen, if you watch Super Netball, that the players now have little numbers on the uniforms. And I believe those are used in some way within the match coding process to make things easier. And obviously things like the court position they're on, that's what you'd be calling out as to what they're doing. But like, it's not a job I want to do. I'm happy to be on the other end of it because it would be stressful. You need to be on top of everything as it's going on. It's not an easy job.
Not at all. Like, I still can't quite wrap my mind around how someone actually, like, it's not the job you could do on a hangover, right? Like, you need to be super fresh and focused. It's because of the speed of the game, like, especially in Super Netball and, best competition in the world, no argument. Like, it is just so fast. But I suppose and Della, I'm going to come to you for this. It's all well and good having all of the data and all of the stats that inform, recruitment, coaching decisions, all of that. But there's certainly an element of storytelling around it, especially as a journalist, that I think is really, really key. So how do you kind of look beyond the provision of cold, hard stats to the storytelling or the narrative behind it and how it's playing out on court? How do you balance the real v the feel?
Well, I mean, just as you were saying then before, I felt like 10 years or so, a bit longer writing about netball, I had a pretty good, grasp about how to do that. And certainly in my writing, I've always gone off feel. You sit courtside, you see things unfold in front of you, and then perhaps you're filing on the whistle. So as you're going, you're looking at the statistics thinking, yes, Kira Austin is having a blinder. She's only missed 2, hasn't had any turnovers, whatever it might be. But the longer that I've worked with Aaron in particular and the way that he can draw out, I guess for me, it's about not looking just at the raw numbers, but how they interrelate to other numbers. If you guys have listened to the show, the PG rating that we talk about, where we compare the number of gains, generally speaking, a defender will get compared to the number of penalties. I often have found myself in the past writing about how clean somebody is, in goalkeeper or goal defense, or alternatively talking about how expensive somebody has been. But then maybe cleaning up in the second half. So I think it's a case of, exactly as you say, balancing those two things. But the more we're able to analyse it post-game, and I guess this goes back to performance analysts and what they do with players, if you can sit down and understand on a deeper level after each round how a certain player has played with a particular metric, when we talk about the PG rating, for example, that then informs the way that you then watch a performance the next time that player plays or when they are coming up against somebody else. So, yeah, I think it's just a case of working out how to balance those two things. The feel is definitely always going to be there. I think we all walk away from games with strong senses about how they've gone, but I guess the statistics can, further inform that.
Yeah, no, it's something that is a really interesting way to work in the performance analysis space. And it's the way I like to work. Erin comes to me with a summary or an idea when we do the podcast, and it's about looking at the quantitative data that either supports or refutes that point. And even if it does refute the point, it doesn't dismiss it, right? Because the numbers don't always tell you the truth. A player can have a really good game and the numbers don't support that, but that they've done their job and they've played well. And it's kind of like the scientific process that we use in research. You develop a hypothesis or a question, and then you test that with data to support or refute what you're thinking. And that's really the process I like to work with, and I think that's why the podcast works so well with Erin.
That's a much better explanation than mine and much more succinct.
No, I
That's
love
my
it.
job.
It's absolutely fascinating because I think this whole this whole topic of statistics is just so varied and interesting. And I kind of see it as it has sort of two aspects. So there's the side of the media side. So the commentators, what statistics they have access to and how they can tell the game, how they can tell people what's happening in the game and explain the story. And then also the kind of reflective post-game analysis that's done by the teams and how those numbers are used there. And we know as well that coaches have access to a lot of data in real time. And I know that Stacey Marinkovic is a big one for data. That's mentioned quite a lot on commentary and things like that. And they might have access to things like centre pass to goal percentage, gain to goal, longest run of goals without a miss, all that kind of information that we see on champion data. So Aaron, what information do you think is the most useful for coaches to have access to in real time in order for them to make changes throughout the game?
I'll probably take an easy way out to the answer to this question and say all of them, or all of it. It depends.
All of it, all the time.
Because I think it really depends on the game plan and what you're trying to do. I would expect that coaches, if they are really data-driven, they have specific targets or metrics they are linking up to how they want to play, and then identify those and look to them within the matches if they're meeting their targets or not, based on what they're trying to do. So if your focus is on limiting an opposition player's involvement, look at their key metrics and if they are above or below what you'd expect. And that's like not just in the absolute terms, but in the relative terms to how they're going. Like we talk about some great mid-court players like Liz Watson and how she can have like 20 circle feeds or whatever in a game, and that sounds great for some players, but it's really, really bad for her. So looking at things in a relative context as well for coaches, I think would be really interesting. But it all depends on, what they're trying to achieve and what their game plan is as to what that key metric's going to be.
You're nodding along there, Della. What do you think?
I'm furiously nodding along because as you were speaking, Aaron, I was almost thinking the exact same words. It depends on the coach. It depends on the game. It depends on the situation. All of those things. I think we sort of sit outside the high performance bubble sometimes, and maybe media is guilty of doing this as well. And you think, oh, well, if X player does X, X is going to happen. Or why hasn't she been benched at halftime? She's had 5 general play turnovers. Well, what's her job? You and I aren't privy to that necessarily. Why did Kim Jenner go on to Liz Watson after halftime at the weekend? We don't know. Was it to stop centre passes or was it to make sure that she earned every single one of her touches for half an hour? There's players have different roles. But I mean, you touched on really quickly there. I mean, that's a big non-answer probably from me and Aaron. Sorry, not giving you a specific one. But I think probably when we talk about gain to goals, they're probably a really key one. But again, it's not just are we converting when we get a gain and turning it into a goal? Where is it breaking down? Where is that turnover happening? So again, it comes back to sort of the situational awareness to say, what is that player's role in this game? And, I love to sort of wheel out this expression that is, not all contacts are created equal. We know that it takes time to wear down players. So does a defender have a KPI for contacts that's different in the first quarter to the last quarter? How many contacts are you allowed before you get a deflection? Is it a deflection or is it an intercept? All of those things would be feeding into it. And as you say, Lucy G, the more data that they have courtside, the more, I guess, they can kind of dig into that and feed it back to them. Like, as you say, Stacey Marinkovic is really well known for doing.
Yeah, it's I find it fascinating because the very non-committal answer which you both gave, which I love. I'm joking. I think there's a sort of element missing that we haven't spoken about, which is around like I suppose like the player-coach relationship and the kind of psychological side of it. Someone can come on and in the first half of a game, yes, they can have 5 general play turnovers, which for anyone listening in the UK, a turnover is a positive stat. Everywhere else in the world, it is a negative stat, just FYI for anyone listening.
Oh, that wouldn't be confusing at all.
Right? It's just what we need. So yeah, someone can have, 5 general play turnovers in the first half. And so people could be calling, looking at the raw data, going, oh my God, get her off the court. Like she's terrible, having a really rough day, blah, blah, blah. But then we're not privy to that high performance environment element of it, and we don't know what that coach is saying to them at half time. They could say, one thing that just resets them, and then they could come on and have the absolute best game of their life. But if we're going just on the raw data, they would have come off the court probably. So I feel like that element of real v feel and the relationships that players have with each other and with their coaches is a really key part of that. Or is that just me?
No, I think that's absolutely right. And you have to think about how much someone's handling the ball as well. Right? That's the huge, people often, Jamie Lee Price is one I think that gets pointed out quite often about the number of turnovers that she might have. In, several games for the Giants this year, she is the outlet pass in defence. She takes it through the middle court and then she delivers the feed, and maybe she gets the little outlet and refeed again. So someone that's handling the ball 6 or 7 times in a single play, the statistical possibility of them making a mistake is obviously higher. And I think that's where the feel comes in very much, because the coaches know that. They know how much work that person is doing, because we're not comparing, in Australian rules football, we have touches. I'm not sure if you have that in the Premier League, but it's literally how many times are you touching the ball? We don't have that in Super Netball. If we did, you could compare those turnovers to those touches. Whereas if a goalkeeper turns over the ball, it's a bit unforgivable because they don't handle it very often. And if they do turn it over, it's a baseline throw in, or it's a terrible outlet pass from a rebound or something like that. And you're much more likely, I would suggest, to get dragged if you had 3 general play turnovers as a goalkeeper in Super Netball than if you had 7 as Jamie Lee Price in centre.
Yeah, 100%. And it's like one of the games that we had in Super League at the weekend, Nat Metcalf, I think from memory, had 48 feeds or something, but only 1 unforced error. So when you balance the error rate versus how much she's actually been on the ball, like, it is pretty remarkable. And like you mentioned there about touches, and how great would that be to have that kind of data. But there's also, so although we have quite a high level, you guys certainly have quite a high level of data, there's still so much more that we could have. It's been mentioned a few times on social media, things like having a heat map visual to demonstrate where centre passes are being received, where feeds are coming from, etc. I think we're starting to see some sort of fans creating stuff like that, which is amazing. But what's the feasibility of getting this next level of data, the things that we're currently missing? What's the feasibility of getting this in real time? Like, are we really far off having this kind of information for domestic or international matches, or do high performance environments have them for international games? Aaron, any light you can shed?
I think some clubs or teams are probably experimenting with this, like elevating the match coding above what is done at champion data statistical level, or whoever's collecting the statistics. I would guess that certain teams are doing this. Our research team at Deakin, we've done something like this across the season of Super Netball, where we used an app to code games and have that spatial data of where things are happening on the court included in the data set. And it works really well when you can watch a match via video and pause when you're doing that. But it's a really time-consuming process, and you're not going to have that live feedback for coaches and players. And when we compared this to real time, it still works okay, but there's a pretty decent reduction in the number of events that you can capture while you're using this app, given how fast-paced the game could be. So you're losing some resolution in your data if you want to do it real time. It's currently not something that is done within Super Netball. They don't track the locations of events. They do that in the Elite Australian Rules football competition. They have that capacity to do it, likely because of the resources and the number of people working on the match coding events and the money. Yes, I can see that symbol, Aaron. And so it's certainly something that's possible, but there are probably more effective ways of doing it in a sport like netball with, again, there's an expense to this, but indoor tracking systems with wearable technology, you can track where players are going on the court. And if you combine that with ball tracking, for example, you could really mesh those two data sets together. As artificial intelligence and image recognition in video starts progressing a bit more, whether that gets applied in a sporting context, Like it's sort of actually used in some broadcast of lower competitions where the ball is tracked by video, and so you can watch it without having a camera person. And like developments in those areas are going to allow from simple video, like us to understand where players are on the court and have that process automated, so it eliminates that resource-based limitation. So it's something that is feasible. It's just whether attention is paid to it as to how far it goes and how quickly it gets developed. So I think it would be more easily achieved if you focused on a single statistic like center pass receives, or more resolution on where shots are being taken from. You could develop those spatial kind of metrics related to that, but doing it for everything across the game requires a little bit more, I guess, development of the techniques around it.
And I suppose again it all just comes down to money, isn't it? It makes me think it gives the saying like make the ball do the work a whole new meaning if we could incorporate technology in that way. Like it'd be absolutely fascinating. And I think as well that those kind of developments, even though it'd be great for our statistics, actually that could really inform some potential rule changes as well. Like
3 seconds, Lucy.
3 seconds. Yeah.
That's where it's at. We can fly a man to the moon, but we can't keep a track of 3 seconds in netball still. You know, there has to be a technology fix for that. Everyone tells me that it would be so difficult, it would be time consuming, it would be expensive. All of those things are probably true, but there has to be a way to do it. But I guess netball is so unique in so many ways that we're not going to be able to, I don't know, Aaron, tell me if I'm wrong, be able to sort of retrofit things into the game, because it is quite unique in where we have the areas where people, you know, different people are allowed. And then obviously the 3 second rule is quite unique to netball too. But it's a constant frustration for me that we can't get a fix. It's too much to ask, I think, at the moment, the speed of the game, particularly at international level, to keep a track of those 3 seconds.
I mean, it's just fascinating, isn't it? And I completely agree. There's been people on Twitter recently who are trying to time it themselves, and there's like 3.9 seconds and 4.4 seconds, and it's quite funny. But actually, like we do sort of need to up our game a little bit in that respect in terms of tech,
and it's not arbitrary. You receive the ball, you get rid of the ball. You know, it's a technological. It's just need a measure of it. You can fix that, can't you, Aaron?
Yeah, come on, Aaron.
Yeah.
No. It's bringing technology into umpiring and all of that. There's some good and bad examples across other sports of how technology is being implemented with umpires. And yeah, I'm not going to touch it with netball. Actually, I'm going to steer clear of that.
I don't blame you at all. I mean, as we've mentioned a couple of times, the UK is pretty far behind the curve in terms of stats. I think we only just started getting live stats this season. Am I right, Lise? I think. So, Aaron, can you give us any insight into the journey to get to where SSN is now in terms of establishing the infrastructure, recruiting and training suitable personnel, etc.? Like, how do we get to a point where SSN is?
I think champion data sort of coming to the table, and I suspect Netball Australia, and I think Champion also partners with Netball New Zealand, that bringing an established external company on board like that makes a huge difference, because they're the ones who are responsible for hiring and training staff and sending staff out to games to do the work. And there's a huge difference in what I would call, you know, the champion data era of netball versus before then. So quite often when we talk about historical stats on our show, we go back to 2009 or 2010, I think, wherever it's, and that's the first year where I can bring up the champion data match center for Super Netball. And there's also links to international matches where they're present and collecting data. If I want to go back and get any earlier data than that, I have to sift through fairly average records of old matches, and the formatting of them is not consistent. It's a bit of a mix as to what you can see, and so it's just not viable to really collate that easily. And I could probably say the same for the recent Commonwealth Games data. Like, there was some interesting stuff there, but it was not really easy to access in the format it was. I think it was uploaded as PDF pages, which is never friendly for analysts. And so that's the big difference. A professional company that does it for a living, their reputation's behind it. They have practices in place from other sports. Getting someone like that on board is really great. So I just did an advertisement for Champion Data there. That's not what it was meant to be, but they definitely do a good job.
Yeah, they completely do. And we're always so thrilled when they're covering the internationals as well. You know, they did the quad series. I think they pretty much do anytime the Diamonds or the Ferns play, which is so useful for, you know, for us over here. I love the little score worm graphic, you know, so you can see how it's been going, and it's just all that kind of information is so valuable. And I think we've talked a bit about coaching and the kind of media side, but one thing we haven't possibly explored in the media space is using stats to kind of back up speculation around squad recruitment or selection. So I think it would be amazing to know whether a certain defensive combination has been more successful than another. I think about this particularly in terms of the Diamonds. So you've obviously got the Courtney Bruce and Sunday Ariang combination, and then, you know, other combinations, and comparing those will be quite interesting in the lead up to international duty. So Aaron, kind of domestically, if clubs are looking to see which players to retain or build a squad around, can you give examples of how the stats can tell the story around which winger tackle centre or which goaler tackle goal shooter or goal defence goalkeeper combinations are the most successful?
It's obviously hard in a domestic competition context because the players you want in that international side aren't playing together, right? You can't explicitly look at when those two players were on court and what worked well. So I think it's, again, going back to your game plan and understanding what you want from your team and potentially looking at your players statistically and seeing what fits, right? Like there are certain wing attacks or goal attacks that have different strengths in different areas, and you can see numerically those strengths by looking at the match statistics. And you kind of want combinations that mesh well. You probably don't want to pick the ones that are clashing with respect to the same statistics. That's really how I think you can understand those combinations a little bit better, is by understanding what you can see what a coach maybe wants. Do they want do you have a really strong goal shooter, so you want a feed-in goal attack, or do you want that goal attack to be taking more of the scoring load, or do you want a bit more of a balance? And you can look at those statistics to kind of figure out who those players are. And there's probably lots of examples. Erin, you know, you might be able to help out with this with respect to the recent selections, that you can see, I guess, a little bit of how, or players that have maybe been left out or versus ones who've been included, and how the combinations might stack up because of that.
Yeah, I mean, Stacey Marinkovic has been really clear in the Diamonds context that she is really looking for those combinations. And I think just one other thing that I would mention would be how they're going against particular opponents. So not to disparage anyone who plays Super Netball, but how a wing defence plays on Liz Watson is different to how you play on a different wing attack. So to look at it on raw numbers and just say, wow, that wing defence is the best wing defence in the league. Well, they might be, but then Liz Watson comes along and, you know, gives her a new last name when they play. So I think that's a really important part of the consideration from the international level too, is where are they sitting compared to those players? I guess Marinkovic is probably talk about her being spoiled for choice in lots of ways, but she knows how her players stack up against Shamira Sterling. She doesn't have to take them all the way to Cape Town to find out what's going to happen. She knows who can play on a Janelle Fowler, and the same go for the English players. I think Eleanor Cardwell probably key amongst them. What a brilliant year for her to come down under. Thank you very much for that, Tracy Neville. So we're going to have 14, 16 games. When I say we, Australia, to have a really good look at her and find out her strengths and weaknesses. I mean, the X factor at international competitions is often when we see someone, have to come up against a player that they haven't played against. And I think possibly the Silver Ferns, that's, has potentially might be to their detriment. When we had Greta Bowetta coming through the ranks, there was some Kiwis that had played against her as a young player and some that never had. And you could pretty much tell who they were because they had this look of absolute shock and fear on their face when they would play her. So I think that's another consideration, is who are you collecting the stats against?
Yeah, that's fascinating, isn't it? And it's kind of a good reminder that, like you were saying before, that kind of stats on their own can be a bit misleading. And I think sometimes you do fall into a few sort of traps if you get too fixated on one particular metric without kind of putting it in context for the others. But something I'm really interested in as well is how we can use stats to create a better experience for the viewers at home and for the fans particularly. So, Erin, are there any ways you can think of that stats can be used to grow the fan base further?
Oh, gosh. I mean, comparing and contrasting what happens on a netball court to other sports, I think is really interesting because you only have 7 players on the court. The amount of work that players are doing. If you've played netball, you understand this, but I think for people that are maybe new to the sport, that might be a way to talk about it. I know a lot of the clubs are collecting things like change of direction, for example, and the Queensland Firebirds are sort of using that in their social media this year. So 1,200 changes of directions in 60 minutes, or acceleration, how quickly you get from a certain speed to another speed, and then how many times you do that. That's a language I think that non-netball people can understand. So I think that's a way to reach them. And then when we have people that are doing things that no one else is doing, I mean, Shamira Sterling's a good example. We talked about her on our podcast a couple of weeks ago, and I was asking Aaron how many blocks, she has, and there's her, and then there's everyone else in the league underneath her. You can add up everyone else's blocks all together and get her total. So there's a way to spotlight players in a really simple way. This is the only place in the world this is happening when we talk about Super Netball. So I think that's one of the ways we could do it.
Yeah, I find that really interesting because I think from a media perspective, what I've noticed in the last maybe 3 years or so is that there's been an emphasis visually on the physicality of the game, and we have a lot of adverts of like players hitting each other in the air and all that kind of stuff, which does show how physical it is and gets rid of that schoolgirl perspective of non-contact sport and all of that rubbish. But actually there's probably a completely different type of story that we could tell with stuff like that, and actually maybe we should start looking to incorporate that as well as showing how strong and physical our athletes are.
I think in Super Netball, I mean, the difficulty is about the audience. Who are we trying to reach? I mean, in Australia, we have, 1.2, nearly 3 million Australians that play netball. 90% of women and girls in this country will play sport. It's probably similar in England if I've ever looked at the stats. So converting people that play on a weekend, that play social netball, converting them into fans has long been considered kind of the holy grail for Super Netball. How you talk to those people is very different to how you might perhaps talk to a fan of Australian rules who now have a netball team. When you look at someone like Collingwood, how they probably are looking for something completely different in the sport. So there's a lot of masters to try and please, and that's what makes it so difficult, I think, to get the marketing exactly right.
Yeah, and I don't think any nation's quite cracked it yet, have they, really? Especially not over here. Huge disparity. One thing that I want to touch on, which we sort of referenced earlier, when we did our first ever episode of the pod, we discussed performance analysis with Tamsin Greenway, and she mentioned that there was no record of her win-loss ratio as a coach. But we know that Lisa Alexander, her winning percentage was 81, 82% or something. So that data for her exists. So, Aaron, can you tell us how much current statistical data is there around coaches and also umpires in netball, if any?
I'm really glad you brought this up because it allows me to tell a funny story, particularly about Lisa. There was a time where I was kind of collating some data about coach win-loss records. And for me, like when you say what data is out there, it was pretty manual in the sense that I had the win-loss records of teams, but there isn't a connection for who was coaching that team at the time. And so I kind of manually added that into my data set, which isn't too difficult, but it requires a little bit of digging. The funny story with Lisa was I was doing this sort of in a Super Netball context, and then people were asking about, what about the back in the day of the Commonwealth Bank Trophy? And Lisa actually reached out on Twitter and sent me a spreadsheet that had been put together by one of her friends with the coaching records of people back in the CBT days. And so how we get that data is if someone, like, I did it recently for the Super Netball stuff, and that might hang around online somewhere. But Lisa had to explicitly reach out to me and send me this spreadsheet that a friend of hers had put together on the coaching records of people back in the day. So sometimes it's really about the people who were kind of involved with the sport at the time and trying to maintain the record keeping. And there's not a lot historically from a coaching and even an umpiring perspective as well. I know, Erin, your perspective of historical netball record keeping is opinionated, or
I mean, it's money, right? It's money when you're running a competition on the smell of an oily rag. And we're talking 20, 30 years ago here in Australia, where players were being, players like Liz Ellis were being paid $50 and 2 rolls of tape. The money wasn't there for record keeping. It wasn't a priority. I mean, we're fortunate in Australia. We do have state-based bodies, so sort of your, the version of your counties. And some of those bodies are better and more resourced. Essentially, Lisa's obviously comes from Victoria, where both of us are based, and it has had a bit of a focus on this in the past, but they're kind of retrospectively trying to catch up on this. It's a constant frustration for somebody like me, because it can be impossible to find the data. And then if you can find it, there's no way to verify or fact check it, which of course is a really important part of what we do. So yeah, to say the least, it is very frustrating. But you mentioned before about umpiring, since Champion Data has been involved in Super Netball, every single decision that the umpires make in a game is recorded in a spreadsheet. It is a terrifying looking spreadsheet, I have to say, as someone
it's very long.
It's a lot of information, but it is all there. So obviously that's what that can be drawn on and can be looked at internally by the umpires and in reviews. So I'm sure they would understand how many contact penalties they're giving, where they're going, all of those kind of things. But it's not really something from a media perspective that we have tapped into yet.
I mean, I assume there must be something, because there was that figure floating around about an umpire makes X number of decisions in a match. I thought, well, that's come from somewhere. So I assume there was some sort of record of it. But I mean, that's fascinating. I wish there was some sort of way of being able to tell that story and sharing that narrative publicly in terms of engaging the fan base.
It's frustrating and there's recent things that are hard to find as well. I interviewed Kelsey Brown a little while ago, and she mentioned that she had won 2 best on at the 2019 World Cup. And I thought, I didn't remember her winning 2. I mean, that's significant too. I'm not sure whether they were pool games, were they finals, and there wasn't a quick and simple way to get that information, because the statistical providers can be different from Com Games into, we talked about Constellation Cup, where they're playing New Zealand and Champion Data is included. Little things like that should be on the record. We should be, Kelsey Brown shouldn't have to sort of remind people about her performances at World Cups. It should all be there in black and white. But again, comes back to money, which is where this started, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, God. It just makes the world go around, doesn't it? It's the common denominator of every single issue in netball, really. But who knows? One day we'll get there. But we're very conscious that we've taken up a lot of your time. So much for doing shorter episodes and going back to that 45 minutes. That was a myth, wasn't it? But Aaron, I'm going to come to you for the final question first. From a statistical perspective, based on what you've seen from recent international test series, what is your prediction for which country will win the Netball World Cup this year, and why is it not England?
I could give you a few reasons for why it's not England.
Don't break my heart, Aaron.
Yeah.
I mean, the bulk of we can look at the recent international competitions, and I think if you're looking on form there, you've really got to still see Australia as the top team in the world, where they had some troubles across international competitions in last year, but they came through with the goods when it mattered in winning all of the major competitions that they were involved in. So on form alone, you've probably got to put them at the top of the list. Looking at what's happening in Super Netball this year, where a lot of you can't include New Zealand in this, but a lot of the big international players are playing. From an individual perspective, and people have picked this up already, that the Jamaican players in Super Netball are like having the time of their life. Shamira Sterling, Jodie Ward, Latanya Wilson, Janelle Fowler, obviously, like if they can connect up team-wise, like that really spells trouble for other teams. If Shamira Sterling, Wilson, Ward, Fowler can play like they do in Super Netball in their international team, like that's tough to stop. So I am probably putting, like most other people, Australia and Jamaica at the top, and probably just giving Australia the edge because of the well-roundedness of their team.
Yeah, love that. Angela, your thoughts?
I mean, I think I have to say, regardless of statistics, my feel probably is very similar to Aaron's. The only caveat that goes with that is Nolan Tarua.
Yeah,
that's it. Like we have seen her pull together teams in short periods of time. We have seen her get performances out of people that whose careers were finished, who were over, who were too old, who were fossils, who hadn't maybe played against some of the leading teams. I do think Jamaica being in the final at the Commonwealth Games, I think, is really important because it alleviates that pressure. They've been there before. They know what it looks like. They know the Australian team minus Gretel Bueta. Let's not forget that she's not going to be there. Kira Austin, Steph Wood, like they're pretty decent netballers, but they don't have the X factor of someone like a Bueta who can swing back to goal shooter and play out at goal attack and win your ball in the middle as well, what she was able to do defensively. But yeah, I think, pity the fool who just thinks that New Zealand are going to be also runs.
Yeah.
So I might put New Zealand in the final just to be different to Aaron with Australia.
Oh, okay. I mean,
very interesting.
Very interesting. I think for world narrative, I would prefer an Australia-Jamaica. I mean, I prefer England's someone final, but I'll take Australia-Jamaica just to keep mixing up the
mix it up.
We can mention England as well. Like Eleanor Cardwell is the key piece, I think, for them to do well. Like, as Aaron said earlier, she's come across to Super Netball and got that experience, which might be a benefit for Australians matching up on her. But the experience you get from playing against those elite defenders week in, week out, it is probably a good thing. So I was just trying to give you some feel-good stuff for England netball. There,
Thank you she's for your having pity, a great, Aaron.
She's having a great season.
She is having a fantastic season, as is Housby, I think. So putting them in a circle together, and we got Fidoju, our little weapon, in the back as well. And who knows? Maybe we could do it. I think it's unlikely.
You might have an Aussie as well.
Yes.
Or two.
Yeah, not long.
I think it definitely sounds as if I do think that Glasgow will probably make the squad. I do think it will happen. Which to pull for Jess to be able to pull that team together now with players playing in New Zealand potentially and Australia and New Zealand in England it's just a mammoth ask for her. But I hope she's not going to die wondering.
Yeah, that's lots of food for thought there. Honestly, both thank you so much for your time today. It's been absolutely fascinating. I've enjoyed this immensely. So thank you both for your time today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Qtr Time. We can't wait to bring you even more netball chat and another super special guest next week.
Make sure you subscribe to the podcast and follow us on social media at Qtr Time Pod for all the latest netball updates. Do get involved in the conversation online by letting us know what you thought of all the matches this weekend and which players have stood out for you.
We'd also really appreciate it, as always, if you could take a moment to rate and review, as it really does help other people to find the podcast and to grow the conversation around our sport. So if you enjoy listening to the pod, do let us know. Spread the word of your netball pals, pop a link in the old group chat, etc., so that even more people can get involved. And don't forget as well, finally, to take advantage of our exclusive 15% discount with Lovell Netball by entering the code NETPOD15 at the checkout at lovellnetball.co.uk. Take care, everyone, and see you soon. Bye.
Bye.